So last week, our gospel asked, "Who do you say that I am?" Did you think about how you would answer that question? Did you think about how your answer leads you into a response, into a way of living as a disciple? The apostles didn't really do much with that question either. If you remember last week, Jesus was teaching them that he comes to suffer and to be rejected and to be killed. And that's not what Peter wanted to hear, so Peter started arguing with Jesus because he didn't want to accept that being the Messiah meant that Jesus came to give his whole life for us. And if a master comes to give himself for others, then what does that say about how his disciples are supposed to act? They must deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow after Jesus. Or as Jesus follows on today by saying, "You must become the servant of all." Who do you say that I am? And what does that answer mean for the way that you live your life? Jesus comes back to his apostles again with that same teaching about being handed over and being killed, and the apostles still don't get it. But you know how you don't want to be the one to raise your hand and ask the question? You think maybe somebody else will ask so you won't have to? Well, none of the apostles wanted to ask the question either. So they just go on about life without answering, "Who do you say that I am?" And that leads them to asking instead, which one of us is the greatest? Totally opposite to what Jesus is trying to get them to discuss. So Jesus invites them to open themselves to learning, to be receptive to the teacher, to receiving Jesus, to receive their calling from God, to receiving a child through their faith. Jesus invites them to recognize in this act of caring for a child their calling of service to others, asking not what can I get out of it, but what can I give that'll be helpful to someone else. And he chooses a child because the child has no power in their society. They don't make the laws. They don't have money. Jesus encourages the disciples to give without asking what can they get back. He's trying to help them understand the cross, that he comes to suffer and be rejected and be killed because he comes to give himself entirely for us out of love. And he wants them to understand that as his disciples, they're called to give of themselves for others. Until they can put aside their ambitions to be the greatest, they aren't going to be receiving Jesus. They're not going to be receiving the one who sent him. They're not going to be receiving the love of God or the peace that comes from fulfilling our calling in life. St. James asks us in our reading, "Where do the conflicts among you come from? Is it not from your passions? Where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every foul practice." When we allow our passions to place our own desires first, that's when we covet without being satisfied. That's when we're envious and jealous and tear down relationships instead of finding true love. Jesus calls us to place the needs of the other above our own wants. That's when we allow love to rest within us. And he doesn't just tell us about it, he shows us through his life and through his death. He shows us how to fully love, how to sacrifice self for others. And yes, there's struggle and pain involved, but there's also resurrection. There's satisfaction and fulfillment and a deep joy in knowing our part in God's plan of making his love present in the world. The alternative isn't as pretty. When we allow our passions to rule us, the jealousy and selfish ambition lead to their own struggle and pain. And in the end, they don't offer satisfaction, but only more jealousy and more selfish ambition. So Jesus offers this subtle invitation this question to get us thinking, who do you say that I am? If we recognize in him the one who's willing to suffer for us out of love, then what does it mean to be his disciple? Aren't we also called to pick up our cross and follow him? Aren't we called to be the servant of all, just as Jesus came to serve all? Aren't we called to set aside jealousy and selfish ambition and instead reflect God's love through our sacrifices?